Here is a strange kind of suffering that does not come from your own wounds, but from trying to heal someone who does not wish to be healed. It's a quiet ache, holy in its disguise, the kind of pain only those who love deeply ever discover. You keep pouring light into someone who prefers the comfort of their own darkness, believing that if you love them enough, if you explain enough, if you wait long enough, they will finally awaken. You stay, you forgive, you compromise, you water the same dead soil, hoping that this time something will bloom. Yet nothing grows except your exhaustion. If this feels like your story, stay here and subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to reveal will finally make sense of the ache you've carried for years. Most people never notice this. Only those who love beyond reason experience this particular heartbreak, the heartbreak of watching someone drown while refusing to swim. You've felt it before, that desperate tenderness that says, maybe if I just give a little more, they'll see. You absorb their storms, carry their moods, fix their chaos until you forget what calm feels like. You become the candle burning itself out, trying to light others, convinced that your dimming flame is proof of devotion. But this isn't compassion, not entirely. Sometimes it's fear. The fear that if you stop holding their world together, everything, even you, will fall apart. Somewhere deep inside, you've tied your worth to how much pain you can carry for others. Every time you've tried to fix someone, what you were really trying to fix was your own fear of being unnecessary. That's why the same story keeps repeating itself, new faces, same pattern. The friend who calls only when in crisis, the partner who promises change but never delivers, the family member who drains your peace until you feel guilty for wanting distance. Each time you tell yourself this time will be different, but it never is, because their brokenness, it's your own attachment to being the healer. You see, the savior complex hides inside the heart of the empath. It wears the mask of kindness, but its origin is survival. You learned early that love must be earned, that safety must be bought through usefulness. So you became the one who saves, the one who absorbs, the one who fixes. You called it loyalty, but it was really self-erasure. And yet understand this clearly, you are not foolish for caring. You are not weak for trying. You are simply awakening to the truth that not everyone wants to wake up. This realization hurts. It feels like betrayal, not of them, but of your own nature. Because you are wired to connect, to heal, to help. But when empathy becomes identity, you start mistaking suffering for purpose. You start believing that your worth is measured by how much pain you can endure for others. Let me explain what that really means. There's a hidden dependency inside the fixer role. You feel valuable when needed, seen when solving, loved when rescuing. But real love, conscious love, does not prove itself through suffering. Real love knows that each soul must walk its own path, stumble through its own lessons, and rise through its own timing. Few people ever see this truth. Most are too busy chasing brokenness to feel alive. But you, if you're listening to this, you've reached a sacred threshold, the point where exhaustion turns into wisdom. Compassion no longer feels like self-sacrifice. You begin to sense that boundaries are not walls. They are acts of clarity. And that's when the old ways stop working. You can no longer pour your life into those who refuse to open their hands. You can no longer explain truth to someone who benefits from misunderstanding it. Something in you knows it's time to stop rescuing people who have chosen their suffering. Here the spiritual paradox begins to unfold. Love demands freedom, yet fear disguises itself as love by trying to control. When you help someone who isn't ready, you are not freeing them. You are protecting yourself from the discomfort of letting them fall. You call it kindness, but underneath it is terror. The terror of watching life unfold without your management. The need to fix is often a disguised need for control. You are not addicted to helping. You are addicted to certainty, because certainty makes you feel safe in a world that keeps moving without your permission. But awakening destroys certainty. It doesn't make you comfortable. It makes you conscious. It takes everything you thought was love and shows you what was actually fear. You begin to see that your need to rescue others has been keeping you from rescuing yourself. You realize that while you've been trying to pull others out of the water, you're the one who's been drowning silently underneath their weight. And this is where the story begins to change. Because the moment you stop fighting to keep others afloat is the same moment you realize you were never meant to carry them in the first place. You were meant to witness, not to manage. To love, not to control. To guide, but never to drag. And when that realization finally lands, when you allow yourself to let go, something extraordinary begins to happen. Because that moment, the one that feels like loss, is not the end of love. It is the beginning of liberation. But here's the part few people ever understand, and it changes everything. This pattern did not begin in adulthood. It was born in childhood, in small rooms filled with unspoken tension. You learned early that love was something you had to earn, that being quiet kept the peace, that being useful kept you safe. So you became the one who soothed, the listener in storms, the peacemaker in chaos. You carried emotions that were never yours to hold. And because no one came to rescue you, you made a silent vow, I will become the one who rescues others. That is how the fixer identity was born, not from arrogance, but from survival. You learned that to be good meant to carry other people's pain even when it crushed your own. You learned that empathy meant self-erasure, that love meant labor, and that silence was the price of acceptance. Every time someone praised your patience, it reinforced the lie that peace only exists when you disappear inside it. You grew into an adult who could sense other people's moods before they even spoke, who apologized for emotions that weren't your fault, who equated exhaustion with purpose. And society applauded you for it. Because our culture worships the savior. We glorify the selfless one who bleeds quietly for others. We build monuments to martyrs and call them saints. We confuse depletion with devotion and call it virtue. We celebrate those who lose themselves for the greater good, but never ask who benefits from their disappearance. We are taught to call it compassion when it is really control, the attempt to manage another's evolution so we can feel secure in our own. And because the world rewards your self-abandonment, you began to confuse boundaries with betrayal. You felt guilty the moment you chose rest. You mistook selfishness for sin. Think about how many times this pattern has replayed. You gave advice that was never taken and blamed yourself when nothing changed. You stayed in friendships that drained you, hoping that your consistency would inspire transformation. You felt guilty for saying no, so you kept saying yes until resentment became your native language. You mistook their chaos for a calling. Maybe I'm meant to help them, but you weren't. You were meant to learn what happens when love loses wisdom. Most people try to fix others to feel in control. But you did it because you couldn't bear to watch them suffer. You weren't trying to dominate. You were trying to save. This is not codependency. It is compassion without boundaries, empathy without grounding, love without guidance. And when compassion forgets wisdom, it becomes captivity. Then, one day, something shifts. The awakening begins quietly. You start to see what was once invisible, that love cannot force growth. Every soul has its own rhythm of awakening. No matter how bright your light, it cannot substitute for another's desire to see. You realize that if you open someone's cocoon before they're ready, the butterfly dies inside it. You cannot rush another person's becoming. You cannot make them hear a truth they have not yet earned. And once you see this, something inside you changes permanently. You cannot go back to who you were. You cannot rescue what refuses to rise. You cannot unsee the cost of being everyone's savior. Because now you recognize that your constant saving was never freedom. It was a disguised form of fear. The fear of losing love, if you stop giving. The fear of watching someone you care for collapse without you there to cushion the fall. The fear that your worth exists only in usefulness. But here is the deeper truth. You cannot save someone who loves their cage. You cannot awaken someone who still worships their sleep. You cannot pour truth into a cup that refuses to be emptied. You can stand at the edge of their darkness and offer light, but you cannot walk the path for them. Because the journey is sacred precisely because it must be chosen. Every soul must meet its own shadow. Every heart must decide when it's ready to turn toward dawn. You cannot save someone who loves their cage. You cannot awaken someone who still worships their sleep. You cannot pour truth into a cup that refuses to be emptied. Let these words settle inside you, not as condemnation, but as relief. Because it means their suffering is not your failure, it is their curriculum. It means your exhaustion was never proof that you didn't love enough. It was proof that you were carrying what was never yours. When you begin to understand this, an immense peace starts to bloom where guilt once lived. You realize that the mirror cannot reflect for someone who refuses to look, that a bird cannot teach a stone to fly, that sometimes love must step back so truth can step in. It is not cruelty, it is clarity. You start to see that boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but sacred lines that keep both souls accountable to their own evolution. And suddenly you feel lighter. You start breathing differently. The tension that once ruled your chest begins to ease. You understand now it's not just you. It's the way you were trained to love. It's the way society rewarded your self-sacrifice and called it virtue. You are not broken for wanting peace. You are simply deprogramming from a system that taught you to equate pain with love. This realization does not make you bitter. It makes you conscious. You stop trying to convince others to change and begin the quiet work of changing your own patterns. You stop confusing control with care. You stop trying to be the hero in other people's stories and start becoming the author of your own. You cannot save someone who loves their cage. You cannot awaken someone who still worships their sleep. You cannot pour truth into a cup that refuses to be emptied. But you can save yourself. You can awaken to your own freedom. You can pour that same truth into your own heart until it overflows, not from exhaustion, but from clarity. Because the greatest act of love is not rescuing others, it is refusing to abandon yourself. And once you understand that, everything that used to hurt begins to... When you finally stop trying to fix everyone, the first thing that comes isn't peace, it's guilt. It arrives quietly, like a ghost sitting beside you in the stillness. You feel its weight in your chest, whispering. You've abandoned them. You mistake the calm for emptiness. You think you've lost your purpose because your purpose was once to repair what was broken. But what you're feeling isn't loss. It's the unfamiliar presence of your own energy, finally returning home. At first, the silence feels unbearable. You've spent years being needed, validated by the chaos you could soothe. Now that noise is gone. and the quiet feels too wide, too hollow. You wonder if you've become cold. You worry you've stopped caring. But this silence is not the absence of meaning. It's the beginning of sovereignty. It's what happens when your nervous system no longer has to translate someone else's suffering into your responsibility. This is what peace feels like when you've only ever known performance. Then the internal work begins. Not dramatic, but sacred. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop rescuing others from lessons their souls specifically designed for them. You begin to realize that your energy is not public property. It's a temple, a sanctuary, a space too holy to be trampled by those who refuse to remove their shoes before entering. You no longer offer pieces of yourself as proof of love. You begin to understand that real love doesn't demand your depletion. It honors your wholeness. In solitude, you start to meet the version of yourself that was buried beneath obligation, the one who exists beyond usefulness. You begin to see your own face without the distortion of guilt. You feel the strange tenderness of being enough without earning it. You realize that rest is not a crime, it's communion. Still, the mind resists. It whispers objections shaped by years of conditioning. Is this selfish? No. It's sacred stewardship. You cannot pour from an empty vessel and call it service. You cannot keep burning yourself to keep others warm. True selflessness requires a self to give from, and you are rebuilding that self now. But they need me. No. They need their own awakening. They need their own fall, their own realization, their own reunion with truth. You were never meant to shield them from their curriculum. Won't I lose connection? No. You'll gain a new kind. One built on mutual respect, not dependency. The people who can meet you in this new energy will find you naturally. The ones who can't will fade, not because you're cruel, but because you've stopped feeding the illusion that held them close. This process hurts because it dismantles an identity. You are grieving the version of you who once believed love meant rescuing, but grief is not regression, it's release. You are shedding old definitions, the way a tree sheds leaves before winter. It looks like loss, but it's preparation. It's the necessary emptiness that makes room for new life. You begin to see the divine intelligence in this retreat. Like the tide that withdraws before it returns stronger. Your withdrawal is not retreat. It's restoration. Like the cocoon that looks like a tomb but holds transformation. Your solitude is not isolation, it's incubation. The silence you feared becomes the soil of renewal. And somewhere in that stillness, a new kind of awareness blooms. You start to see the difference between love and attachment, between empathy and enmeshment. You realize that protecting your energy doesn't make you less compassionate. It makes you more precise. Compassion without boundaries is chaos. Compassion with boundaries becomes clarity. This is not abandonment, it's discernment. This is not cruelty, it's clarity. This is not giving up, it's giving space for divine timing to unfold. You are learning to stand at the edge of another's journey, open heart, grounded boundary. You can still love them, but from a higher distance, where compassion does not collapse into control. You begin to understand that sometimes love must be the quiet witness, not the constant savior. You realize that stepping back is not the end of connection, it's the beginning of truth. The world might not understand this version of you. They may say you've changed. They may accuse you of indifference, but let them. They don't see the sacred fire that has purified your intentions. They don't see that your withdrawal is not punishment, it's prayer. A prayer that says, may everyone awaken when they are ready, and may I no longer interfere with divine design. You will have moments of doubt, days when you miss the drama, the purpose that came from being the rescuer. But then something miraculous happens. Your nervous system begins to heal. Your body feels lighter. You start sleeping deeper. You laugh again without checking who needs saving before you exhale. You begin to see beauty in stillness. You realize that nothing is missing. You are simply mistaking chaos for connection. And with time, your empathy matures. It becomes wisdom. You no longer rush to fix, you hold space. You no longer chase understanding, you embody it. You no longer confuse suffering with depth. You begin to sense that your mere presence, grounded and whole, it's reverence. So now give yourself permission. Permission to rest, to be silent, to stop performing as the savior, to let people walk their own path, even if that path leads through darkness. To stop mistaking their suffering as your summons, to be light, not leash. There is holiness in your stillness now. You realize that stepping back is not abandonment, it's divine trust. You are no longer trying to control the timing of someone else's awakening. You trust that their soul has its own clock. You've stopped rushing in to rescue the lesson from unfolding. You stand back open-handed and let grace do the work. Because love that needs to manage is not love, it's fear. And you are done being afraid of letting go. Slowly something begins to glow within you. You no longer chase broken things. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You become a calm, luminous field, steady, grounded, alive. People begin to heal in your presence, not because you fix them, but because your peace reminds them of what's possible. Your energy becomes a quiet mirror, where others remember their own wholeness. You realize that your silence carries more truth than your speeches ever did. You've stopped explaining what you are now. You've stopped proving your softness, your goodness, your care. You've learned that you do not need to convince anyone of your love when your very being radiates it. And when you finally return to the world, you return differently. You walk among the asleep, but you no longer try to wake them. You understand that awakening cannot be forced, it must ripen. You become the border dweller, 1 foot in the human story, 1 in the unseen. You witness without interfering. You love without attaching. You serve without self-sacrifice. You have become the quiet evidence of another way of being. You are no longer the rescuer, you are the reminder, no longer the healer. You are the field where healing happens. Your presence itself becomes medicine, not through words or persuasion, but through frequency. You don't preach freedom anymore. You embody it. You have become what you were once trying to teach, and then gently you begin to forgive yourself for all the years you gave too much. You realize you were never broken for caring deeply. You were simply called to learn love without control, to give, not as obligation, but as overflow. The same tenderness that once drained you now fills you. It circulates through you like sunlight through glass. Nothing to hold, everything to radiate. Because that is the truth of love. It was never meant to consume you. It was meant to expand through you. You were never meant to be the fire that burns out. You were meant to be the sun that shines without depletion. You guide without chasing. You bless without binding. You love without losing yourself. And now as the journey closes, let these words settle like dawn on your soul. You cannot unsee what you've seen. You cannot unknow the truth of boundaries. You cannot go back to bleeding for what refuses to breathe. You can only rise quietly, gracefully, and free. You stand now as a lighthouse, still, radiant, unmoved by the storm, guiding by presence alone. You are the sun, after a long night, shining not because the world demands it, but because that is what you were born to do. And this peace, this power, this luminous rest, is the love you were always meant to become.